Well, I'll just say welcome everyone. We are on the path chapter 20, probably one of everyone's favorite chapters in Compass, yes. Resurrection. And Tanya's been really good tonight. Thank you so much.
I have a prayer for us to begin with. It's called Take, Lord, and Receive, and many of you may already know it. Take, Lord, and receive all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, and my entire will that I have to possess. You have given all to me. To you, Lord, I return it. Everything is yours. Do with it according to your will. Give me only your love and your grace, for this is sufficient for me. That's St. Ignatius Loyola. It's a beautiful prayer. I heard a song this morning too. Someone sent me a song of that prayer. Yeah. I'm really excited that we're looking at the chapter on the resurrection because I think it's a very exciting chapter and all the stories are really interesting. This chapter comes from Luke mostly. Most of the chapter is from Luke. And so there's one couple of things that are missing that are in the Gospel of John. And we may talk about those too. The beginning of the chapter tells us that deep in grief, the women went to the tomb to put spices and oils on the body. We're surprised that no one was there except for two men who appeared. And they said, "Why do you look for the living among the dead?"
Can you imagine, like, being greeted with that? I just can't even imagine what that must have felt like.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
So what do you all think about those words? Why do you look for the living among the dead?
Startling.
Startling, yes.
And they had been grieving. They had already been grieving for a couple of days. And just that shock of grief, it wouldn't have seemed real. Like,
right,
something doesn't compute.
And of course, when the women went back to the disciples and told them what they had heard and seen, these words seemed to them like an idle tale, and so they didn't believe it all. Do you have those pictures from the Mary Magdalene? What is not in Luke is the appearance of the risen Christ to Mary Magdalene. And can I pass it around? And where are they?
Yeah, I think you can. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I want to show this one first.
Oh.
There's a lot of really wonderful art of Mary Magdalene and the appearance of Jesus.
I would have thought you would have,
that's raw, Angelica.
They expect to see him in there and he's not there. And then they go and tell someone, and I would immediately start doubting. But is what he said really true?
Yes.
I needed somebody to lead me and tell me really what happened.
And where is he? I think that's what one of the women were saying is, what have you done with my Lord?
Mm-hmm.
The Mary Magdalene story that's in John is taking place in a garden. And Mary Magdalene comes upon Jesus in the garden, doesn't recognize him at first, and then does recognize him. and is able to go back to the disciples and tell them that she has seen the Lord and heard him.
And I think it's when he speaks that she recognizes him, isn't that right? And that's so interesting.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
The disciples gathered together in a locked room upstairs and were grieving. And as this was happening, they realized Jesus had come into the room with them and said, "Peace be with you." What do you think the disciples were? How do you think they responded to this?
To the peace be with you.
Well, to Christ being there.
Mhm.
They didn't believe he was. They didn't believe him ahead of time.
At first, they didn't.
Why would they believe him now?
Right.
But it seems as though he didn't look the same. You know, like when they're talking to him on the way to Emmaus on the road.
Yeah.
Yeah. It seems like that. I mean, he had the marks. He had the proof, that's. But it seems like his body or something. He must have appeared a little different.
That makes sense.
Well, for one thing, they had really beaten the snot out of him before they crucified him. So the last time they saw him, he was really badly beaten.
Yes.
And so then to see him whole and fully restored and all that would have been like that wouldn't have made sense either.
I kind of thought that maybe they didn't expect him to come back that soon. That they expected him to be later and a lot more presence and so on.
Fanfare and stuff. When he came back later for fanfare.
Yeah.
But we're not going to probably look the same either, because it says that we're going to be like the angel said, be neither male nor female. I think about that in the resurrected body. So
I need a picture.
at this point, he was in his resurrected body. That means that he would have been neither male nor female.
I've never thought of that either.
That's what it said. It said when we're raised, we'll be neither male nor female.
That's Paul reasons.
Yeah.
After Jesus has told the disciples to have peace, he tells them again, "Peace be with you, as the Father has sent me, so I send you." And reminds them that when they receive the Holy Spirit, they will forgive the sins of any. And it says, if you retain the sins of any, they are retained. I want to talk about that because I have a question mark by that. And what that means, what it meant to the disciples and what it meant to the people that were sinning, that the disciples were preaching to and helping. I don't understand that if you retain the sins of any, they are retained.
I'll tell you just my compliment. And of course, I tend to just talk about what it means here and now, at least to me. I know I'm not alone in this, but it may also be a very minority point of view, and I'm sure. But I think it's talking about a reality within ourselves, and mainly if we can't let go of whether it's full forgiveness or of someone or not, but if we cannot let go of their sin within ourselves, then we're the ones who are retaining and in a sense really deeply and perhaps poorly impacted. Because it's God who gives us that is complete and total. I don't know, so that's how I think of it,
Oh,
on a really human scale. But y'all may have other knowledge and other thoughts that I don't have and would like to. Because I think this has been really misused through the centuries. Perhaps a confession.
I kind of view this as kind of an ordination that gives them powers that they didn't have before. And therefore it should be within them, at least at their level, to forgive.
And that's huge, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's huge. A big commissioning to live into. That's hard.
Would that be on par with like the absolution that we do in our service?
Yes, no, I think that's correct. I mean, that is one of the kind of claims of the church. Only those who are kind of part of that apostolic succession allowed within the Episcopal tradition to declare absolution of sin.
And notice how Dave's words, it was to declare
Mm-hmm.
God's absolution of sin.
Right.
It's not like we're doing it.
Yes, I
Right.
certainly, hopefully most people understand that, but as Claire said, it's very true that this passage has been abused over the millennia, used to control people and to weaponize the sacrament and the confession. So it's certainly a passage that makes me uncomfortable as well.
But don't the Roman Catholics still believe that the priest has authority to absolve the sin, as opposed to the Episcopal priest?
I would think, at their best, that they would say what Dave says. But in their humanity and maybe mixed upness, maybe some of them would not.
But yeah, and even the Roman Catholic Church is not a monolith, so you're going to have a lot of diversity of opinions. But I mean, as far as their publicly stated theology, I think that's a part of it. And I couldn't count the number of people I've talked to who had the sacrament withheld from them, as if it belongs to the priest or to the church. And so, anyways, I think that certainly is a stronger way of thinking of the Roman Catholic is in other traditions.
And there was even a time, and I don't know if it was just in different parishes, but we went to a church that a man was divorced and he refused communion.
Oh, I've had a lot of conversations with those people. Yeah.
The good thing about it, it adds to the congregation in the Episcopal Church.
And I've also known people who've spent thousands of dollars and a lot of time trying to get an annulment from the church. That is not an easy thing to do. It's expensive and it's, in my opinion, humiliating. I try not to cast aspersions on other denominations, but I've seen some people badly wounded.
And I think one thing I want to follow up on this as another example is, I think this was at clergy conference. Dave would have missed this part because he was recovering, but there is a provision in our canons, which is our church law, or maybe it's in the prayer book, I don't see it, I don't even know where it is, that a priest can withhold communion from someone, maybe it's in the for some egregious reason or other. Now, I know one person who's used that provision one time. But at clergy conference, the bishop said, I want you all priests to know that is not your call to make. If you feel like someone should not be receiving communion, you need to call my office and discuss it.
Well, I've known these people that have been shunned before. So I got shunned. And when you're shunned, you basically are not going to be fellowshiped with. Nobody would talk to you. They refused to even associate with you. And it was because of my stand about the treatment of women. So shunning is also a part of that, and putting people in a place to where they're less than. You're not going to be in the kingdom of God. That was something that was really, really difficult to deal with. We're coming to church.
And see, and right there, we see all the ramifications in the conversations about retaining the sins.
Bob, would you like to tell us about Thomas's adventure?
You want me to read it?
You don't have to read it, just tell us.
Well, I'll try to add a little bit. Thomas comes in and he's a doubting Thomas, of course. Figure that we carried down through the ages, and he said, I don't believe that you're the Christ that was crucified. And Christ held out his hand and he said, see, the holes in the hands from the nails nailed to the cross. Thomas reaches out, sticks his finger, and he said, I believe.
Put his hand in his side.
Yeah.
There's some pretty interesting art about that one. Yeah.
What'd you say?
Oh, there's some art about that one.
Oh,
Sticking
yeah.
the finger inside.
What was in his side? I thought it was in the.
No, it's both.
Speaking of art, pass this book down, Ellen. I want you all to see, this is a wonderful book. I'm pretty sure it was written by a Roman Catholic, because he says that there was an appearance of Jesus to the Virgin Mary. And I don't think that's in scripture. So
It could also be an Orthodox tradition, but
It
it does
could
sound
be.
like something.
it's interesting. The art is great.
It's interesting too that, Jesus didn't humiliate Thomas for his question,
right.
but he accommodated him,
Mhm.
So.
And he said, have you believed because you've seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe. I think that's what the disciples did. They came to believe. It was not instantaneous.
There is a suggestion here that Thomas missed the meeting, and that he just wanted to see what the others had seen.
Yes.
And that would only be human.
Right. He just wanted what the others had seen, and done. The road to Emmaus, I think, is a wonderful story. There's so much in it. It just says that two of them were going to a village called Emmaus. And later it says that one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered the man who appeared to the two people. They did not know who it was, but he wondered, why are you asking what's going on in Jerusalem? Don't you know what's been happening? And the man begins to tell them more than they had thought they would hear. What did anyone think of this one?
I think the idea that Christ be with you and you not recognize him. And I think of the Bible passage that we read this morning in prayer, that if you have, when were you in prison and we didn't visit you, or when, and if you haven't done it to the least of these, there's a connection there, I think, to that idea. I love this story because it wasn't, there's so many things going on with it. And it wasn't until the breaking of the bread that they realized what was happening. This one is a major subject for an artist named Caravaggio, and it's in this book. And he does a neat thing with the picture. He paints Christ without the beard. So, I mean, there's the physical not knowing who he was because he looked different, because he doesn't have a a beard, and, you know, that's quite possible. It's a beautiful, beautiful picture, but,
You have the male, not female thing, beard.
could be.
Yeah, I'll find that.
This is the painting. And, doesn't have a beard. And then the perspective and it's very Baroque with, and I mean, you really feel like you reach right in and grab the stuff off the table. It's,
I loved all the stark contrast in that painting of light and dark. Like how much is unknown, but there's still, you know, enough light over him experience.
There's something in the Young Life tradition, don't familiar with Young Life, I'm sure, that has to do with Emmaus. Do you recall what that is?
Well, I know the Methodists, at least they did, walked the road to Emmaus.
Right.
It was a retreat.
Yeah.
Similar to Curcio, I think.
Yes.
I think similar to Curcio,
Yes.
kind of a renewal type retreat.
I like the idea about the lack of recognition, because I think we all struggle with that.
One of the things, well, the beginning of their seeing Jesus finally, while they were talking about what he had said on the road to Emmaus, he himself stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." I didn't understand why it said he himself stood among them, when at the very beginning we were told Jesus himself came near and went with them. I guess it's okay. They can do that. Poetic justice. In that part about the road to Emmaus and what happened when everyone got together and Jesus was there, it says, while in their joy, this is the disciples, while in their joy they were disbelieving and still wondering. And he said to them, "Have you anything to eat?" That, you know, he's letting people see that when he eats, he's not a ghost. He's not an apparition at all. He's a person that's going to eat in their presence. And I think that all he said on the road to Emmaus is summed up at the end of this part of the chapter, when he says that all these words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, everything written about me in the law of Moses, prophets, and the Psalms must be fulfilled. He opened their minds to understand the scriptures. And he said, I'm sending you to what my Father promises. So stay here in the city until you've been clothed with power from on high. The next part of the chapter has to do with Jesus in Galilee. First, he appears to the 11 disciples on the mountain. And then it's what I thought was one of the very best stories, when he comes to the shore and sees the men out fishing and they don't recognize him, but he builds a fire and tells them to cast their nets on the other side of the boat. They have some good success with that. And I also thought it was humorous, or, I mean, it was not humorous to me that it was Peter. That Peter, when he realized it was Jesus, had to get up, jump into his clothes, and then jump into the sea instead of waiting on the boat.
He was excited.
Yeah, he was excited. Where did that book end up? There it is. Well, I'm going to fast through this.
I was wondering why was he without clothes to start with?
I know.
Odd.
I guess he likes to fish that way.
I guess so, but I don't, that's a new one on me.
Yeah.
Obviously, without clothes. Like,
But it always speaks to me a little bit about human nature, that they were like, didn't know what to do, and so they went back to doing what they had always done. You know, they went back to fishing because that's what they knew, and they were kind of bumbling along, not knowing what to do next. And then Peter says, "Well, I'm going fishing."
I'm going.
When Peter heard that it was the Lord, he did those things, jumped into the sea. He saw the fire and he heard Jesus say, "Come and have breakfast." He said, "Who are you?" And Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them and did the same with the fish. And this is the third time that Jesus appeared to them after he was raised from the dead. My favorite part of this story is after they finished breakfast, Jesus asks Peter, "Feed my lambs." He first says, "Do you love me more than these?" And Peter says, "Yes, you know I love you, Lord. Feed my lambs." The second time he says, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he said, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus tells him, "Tend my sheep." He said for the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he had said this to him a third time. "Do you love me?" He said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." And Jesus says, "Feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and go out where you wish. But as you grow old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will fasten a belt around you." And then he says to them, "Follow me." He's telling them when he says someone else will fasten a belt around them, what's going to be happening to him, what kind of death is going to be happening to him. What did anyone else think about this story? I really enjoyed this particular appearance. Ralph?
Well, I mean, I think it was sort of a retort to Peter doubting him 3 times in Gethsemane.
Yes.
And although I was a little puzzled by the belt thing, was that supposed to be manacles or what?
The belt.
Yeah.
I think it is just a way of saying you'll be put into bonds. Taking your execution.
So they asked the question, why would you ask us that, right? And my thinking is, of course he knows the answer, but what he wants to hear is a profession of faith. And that's what you say, "I know you and I believe in you, and I'm faithful." So I think it's what we do when we do a creed. We believe, and we say it, and it's good for us to do that. That's what they're doing. They're also professing.
Yes.
Faith.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. God does not need to hear us talk about how great God is.
No.
And Jesus, the resurrected Jesus, wasn't some insecure, needy person wanting to make sure that his friend Peter loved him.
And Jesus should have looked at him and said, "I know you love me. I want to hear you say it." Because it's for your own good.
I've always thought that whole process after this is a process of telling stories to get the main point across. And I think for Peter, this was a true cross that he had to bear because he did deny Christ 3 times. And then he probably tells the story over and over and over again that I was so weak that I couldn't even stand up for Jesus at the time of the trial. And yet he forgave me. And there's a power in that storytelling that I think probably was told over and over and over again. So,
You can imagine that even in today's time, if someone tells you a story like that, think how far that goes.
One of the things I remember about this story is the talking about, did he really understand love? When they rewrote it, is it agape? Is it brotherly love? Is it, what kind of love is he talking about that he was confused on? What kind of love? But I don't know, because I think sit here and I go, is he talking about that agape love of, you know, you love your neighbors and you love all these, you know, there's no hatred and resentment? I don't know, because I always saw it as, what love was he talking about? Because when we translate from the Greek, what is it, 4 or 5 different loves? Is that right? 4 or 5 different.
Yeah.
And so was he confused on some level of, which love are you talking about? Are you talking about agape love? Are you talking about brotherly love? Are you talking about, but I don't know, that was just another version.
Maybe it's all of those.
Yeah.
But I think the Greek is always
That's what I
agape.
was,
Yeah.
Wasn't Peter the only one that stuck around, though? He was, you know, he stuck around, he died 3 times. Everybody else fled.
They were already gone.
They're already gone, but at least he stuck around.
Yeah. Of course, the women, some of the women, were there for the crucifixion.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
But, you know, but that's interesting. Maybe the women couldn't have been in that public space, that courtyard.
So you gotta get Peter.
Yeah.
He showed up. He was there, and he wouldn't have been there if he wasn't for sure.
Yeah, but he felt guilty because he denied Christ 3 times before, so he had to get straight with him.
I'm not sure that he even denies him. You know, Mark. I think Mark, Peter, and everybody else, they run away. They never come back.
That's very interesting.
Some of the Gospels want to give Peter a little bit more credit than others.
And we have to put them all together and make sense out of all of them. You know, come together, right?
Yes, and you know, we said a gazillion times, cautioned you about homogenizing the Gospels, and you know, nowhere are the differences in the Gospel theologies more stark, in my opinion, than in the resurrection. So, kind of running them all together is very weird, in my opinion, because none of this detail is in. Ends with empty tomb. There's no resurrection appearance.
The woman's bleeding.
In terror, yeah, they say no one to anybody. So eventually, somebody said something to someone, or we wouldn't have had the story.
Well, isn't there also, and I know we're talk about it, the ascension, but wasn't there things that was happening that you weren't supposed to do because he hadn't ascended yet? Wasn't there some things not supposed to happen?
John, in John's gospel resurrection account, Jesus says something to Mary Magdalene to the effect of, "Do not try to hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended."
So I just wondered if some things had not been fulfilled yet. That's why some things were not in the right sequence.
Maybe what needed fulfilling was simply Jesus appearing.
Yeah.
You know, and confirming for people and affirming for people.
On the subject of giving Peter credit that maybe he doesn't deserve, I'm real pleased that this book, again, there's an awkwardness in putting all these accounts together. But the last page on 270 includes what they call Paul's encounter with Jesus. This is the earliest written account of the resurrection that we have. So, you know, this is before Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John have been written down. This is the earliest written account. And is there any glaring detail that you notice about in this account? There's no Mary Magdalene. There's no women. Women are written out of the story.
Yeah.
And who's given credit? Peter. So just an interesting detail.
So the nurses do all the work and the doctor gets all the credit.
Sure.
I wanted to show this picture of the Ascension again, even though I know you've already seen it.
Oh, we can never see these pictures too much. And I you know, I don't know that I've seen them. Oh, I love the color. So fun.
Yeah, that's pretty grand, huh?
It is. It really is glorious. Do you know who painted this?
It looks like Raphael. Doesn't say.
Raphael.
I was looking for context of the artist in the book. I couldn't find. There it is.
Pietro Perugino.
Oh, yeah, there must be.
I wanted to read the poem that the author suggested for the Ascension. The first time I saw this in the book, I thought, really? I don't think that goes with the Ascension. And the more I thought about it, I really liked it because the Ascension, yes, that was Jesus rising to God, but the Ascension is very important to all of us as his people. So this little poem is called Still I Rise. Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide, leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise into a daybreak that wondrously clear, I rise, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. That's by Maya Angelou. I think it's only the last two stanzas that looked on my phone to find the whole thing and thought, no, these are good. This is good.
Can I say something? I'm trying to comment to this. I love that it's kind of like a cosmic reality and a really individual reality.
Yes, that's what I liked about it too. I could really appreciate the rise.
So it seems to me like we're talking about this chapter, it doesn't show the crucifixion in fact, but the period of time of the crucifixion and the appearance of Jesus to the women and then meeting with the apostles and then the ascension. So it's a pivotal time. It's a pivotal story in the history of the world. Okay, it's different than anything else. There's this guy who was crucified for all of us, and he ascended into heaven, which is, does that carry that significance in our church? Thinking the importance of this story.
Of the ascension or the?
Well, what's the really important part? The crucifixion or his reappearance or the ascension? I mean, aren't those pretty pivotal stories in our thinking?
Yes, and there are a lot of different ways you can think about that. I think especially for John, incarnation, crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension are kind of one thing. You know, and it doesn't make sense, but within that Johannine theology, I think that's how it works. I think that historically, the ascension has been considered one of the important feast days in the church. It fell away because we don't like worshiping on Thursday. And so I think that we have come to, in many Western nations, to kind of de-emphasize the ascension, which in the early church was every bit as important as the incarnation.
The incarnation being what? Incarnation was it?
Christmas.
Okay, the birthday.
Yeah.
You got the birth, the crucifixion, the return, and the ascension. Those are important things.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, I don't know myself what to make of the ascension. I mean, it comes out of a cosmology that perhaps we don't relate to as much anymore. We kind of have to translate a lot of the stuff in our own minds because we don't have the same hierarchical view of, you know, the earth is down here and the heavens are up here. And in order to get to heaven, he had to, you know, go back up into the clouds. And
I was kind of puzzled by the reference to ghosts.
Ghosts. Mm-hmm.
Just, I don't know.
In the text itself or in the comments? Yeah. I think one of the comments just trying to help us all understand that Jesus came back in a resurrected body that wasn't like Casper the Friendly Ghost. And he's next.
But one of the accounts does talk about the graves being opened up.
Yes.
Maybe it's Matthew and
Uh-huh.
the dead came back. So it's ghosts kind of.
Yeah. But it was like,
But
you
not
could think of a
Jesus.
ghost. No, it was
One of the questions at the end of the chapter, the questions for the journey, asks what it might mean that the women were the first proclaimed, what that means to us today. And I couldn't think of an answer to that question. So I was hoping someone here would have an answer to it.
What does it mean?
Says the women are the first to proclaim the good news of the resurrection. What might this mean for us today?
I'm gonna take Father Dave's side.
I got a sense that it meant they're equal. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been given this particular role.
And you all know this, I'm sure, but Mary Magdalene in our tradition is often referred to as the apostle to the apostles. Apostolon just being kind of from the Greek word to send. And so Mary was the first to see the resurrection, experience it, and then was sent to the apostles. So in a sense, she is kind of the primary and first apostle.
And she also, her day is one of our major feast days. One of, not that many.
There's also a Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Some of you may be familiar with. It was one of the I guess, Nag Hammadi text, I think. But you know, it was an early gospel account that gave Mary this very privileged position, knowing Jesus and also being treated by the apostles as unreliable and worthless because she was a woman. And you get that same sense from especially one of these gospel accounts, which one it is, where the women go to they see the resurrection, they go to the disciples and tell them, and they said these words seemed an idle tale and they did not believe them. So they're treated as unreliable. Idle tale is a polite translation of the Greek, which could also probably be translated with two-word phrase that is initialized BS. You know, would be a pretty good way to translate. Like, this is just a load of crap.
We finished the chapter 21 of the Revelation in Ben's Bible study. So the 12 gates are of the apostles. So David led the discussion, and he said, "Well, is Judas part of the thing?" Is most people said, "Well, I can't believe that." And I said, and he said, "Well, who is the 12th apostle?" So I got thinking about that, and I said, "Is it Paul, or is it, you know?" Again, I said, "You really stir things up." You said the 12th apostle was Mary.
I go,
She was the apostle to the.
and she was with Christ, and there were other women who were with him. And that's one of my gripes, is that they were completely written out and ignored and not given any regard that they were there, that they experienced these things, and that there were even writings that were not canonized because they dealt with a woman's perspective.
Yeah. But there's no denial by those people now that instant when he visited with Mary Magdalene was the first occurrence after the crucifixion. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's generally assumed. Like I said, the kind of the flying appointment is this Pauline account. But given the fact that every other text, there's general agreement within all these differences about what happened, there's general agreement that it was the women who were the first.
But Paul has a problem with women, and
Yes,
it's
he does.
evident over and over and over again if you're reading Paul.
Yeah.
That he really had a problem with women.
Yeah.
I keep looking for the switch that was turned that made the difference in the way the world is today. And I think that appearance of Jesus to those women was the pivotal point in time when mankind realized that he was alive. Pretty important.
That to me is the importance of all the appearances, that finally the disciples come to believe what they're seeing, and they come to believe what they need to be doing. I can't imagine how that would have worked without the appearances after the resurrection, of the resurrection.
One of the unfortunate, I guess, side effects of having like a canonized scripture that's closed is that if you're not careful, you can start thinking that, well, this was the last time the resurrected Christ appeared was here at this point in the Gospels, instead of thinking in terms of the ongoing history of Christ showing up again and again.
And I think for me, that is one of the significances of the women being the first to proclaim the good news of the resurrection. So, borrow a theme from our quiet down Tuesday. If we all develop some humility, then maybe we can listen to voices and people who have experiences of this resurrection power that we may not normally want to hear or can hear and see. And, you know, Much less people admitting.
My father says that Christ appeared to him on the battlefield. He was wounded.
Wow.
He was the last one, the only survivor. And that was a story I heard from my father. He had made some vows at the time.
That's all I have. Anyone else have any more comments?
Well, I'll tell you one thing, if I have a problem, I want to find a smart woman.
Gosh,
I'm
only
gonna get
knew
it.
where to look to find one of those.
I have one right here, but I mean, it's like Home Depot, you know, I had a problem and they couldn't get this order straightened around. And there was a woman that had worked there for 20 years. I went back to her and it's fixed. You know, and I just find that over and over and over because they have the follow through and they can focus and all that. And they can do multiple things at one time. It doesn't disturb them when you come and interrupt them to do something where a man gets all flustered. They come back later, make it.
Yeah, I'll vote for you.
We don't have that problem at our house.
Thank you, Tommy, so much. Yes, you did a great job.
Thank
So-
you. That's wonderful. But
Yeah. So next week, chapter 21. Yeah. Yeah, and I guess next week will be our last class over the new year.
Cartoon. You have it. I'm not jumping the gun.
23.
she's in there, both of them.
And you all are the ones that are not missing.
But we're used to doing that.
Yeah.
Learning.
Remember who else was in EFM?
Who?
Jane?
Absolutely. She was one of the very, very first.
Yes, yeah.
So I have a question. He just came back into Pentecost.
They didn't make it down.
He just came back to Pentecost.
Well, we're not told, I mean,
Shut his naked
When did Jesus breathe into the apostles of old?
Maybe they
well, that's
from
the gospel.
Yeah.
So that's,
Of his story here.
well, John has a different Pentecost story than Luke.
Oh, what are we supposed to believe?
Well, I mean, I'm a heretic, and you know,
No, that's all right. I like heretic. When Jesus at some point in time bringing the Holy Spirit into the apostles, is that correct?
into them, correct?
Yeah.
Because the translation says breathe on them.
No, you had to have coming into.
No, that's the Greek word, infuseo, breathe into them. And it evokes,
Was it that at Pentecost? When was that?
that's John's version. So that's why the disciples didn't, John appears to them. He breathed into them and said, receive the Holy Spirit if you forgive the sins of anything. Now, the Pentecost story that we're more familiar with is Luke from the beginning of it.
Well, does Luke ever have a situation where Christ breathed the Holy Spirit into the apostles? Just like that.
So I said,
Yeah, just but the Pentecost event is when
Which Android phone
it was a very